Real quick before we get started, this is the second part of our talk with ShiZZa OaK.
Welcome to AOL. Welcome to AOL Underground.
Well, here's a good story, which kind of is a good segue between AOL and the internet, is the closest I probably got to getting in trouble was when I was done with an official AOL account. My town finally got like local ISPs. You know, it had faster connections, faster modems. It was local, so I had my parents switch over to that from our official paid AOL account. And we had one major ISP in town. There was never busy signals. It was much better than quote unquote local AOL. So I'd already dabbled in a little bit of, I'd read a bunch of, sometimes those mass mails just had text files, and a lot of them were about hacking and phreaking and things like of that nature. And I was a young mind. It was all new to me. I read all that stuff, whether I was interested in it or not. I'm like, this is neat. This is new. So I learned a little bit about how to hack and whatever. And I use a very loose sense of the word. I don't pretend to be any insanely skilled hacker or anything. But the local ISP gave each user a little bit of web space back when everybody could create their own little website, have a little bit of, whatever. And they gave you FTP access to do that. So naturally, I logged into my FTP one day. I'm like, I'm going to start digging around some directories. Maybe I can see other people's web pages. Maybe I can just, who knows, you're exploring. So I explored and explored and explored. And I found what some of your listeners might understand as an unshadowed password file. And what that was I don't know, I'll do the simplified version, but it was in a Unix FTP system. It stored everybody's, login passwords or whatever into a master password file. And you could shadow it, which I understand it basically just hid it from everybody who wasn't like a super user. But they were also, in that day, they were encrypted, but they weren't salted. It was very rudimentary encryption. Well, the geniuses at my local ISP had it where it was supposed to be. I looked in that directory. There it is. It let me literally download their master password file because it was unshadowed. I could see it right there. And then I started asking around the chat rooms. Okay, I got this. What can I do with this, guys? Let's play here. And so I'll keep this short, but I found a program that I'll never forget called Crackerjack. Don't know if that's come up on here before, but props to the guy or people who made Crackerjack. It was a DOS-based password cracker that came bundled with a dictionary file to, brute force and check passwords for these very specific Unix unshadowed password files. At this time, I'd upgraded to a Pentium 100 from that 486. It took 3 full days, my P100, to crack this using a dictionary file that I had. And I remember it finally, I woke up one morning and it was like done at the bottom. I was like, oh my God, okay. And it spit out a text file that every other line was login password, login password, login password, plain text. And there were hundreds. I basically had...
This is for every user?
Every user.
Holy shit.
I had including the administrators.
Nice.
So I didn't really do anything with that. One other thing I did do with it, I had a teacher in high school that I really liked, and Mr. Mick. Shout out to Mr. Mick if you're out there still. And he was the cool teacher. He played Rage Against the Machine in class. He was my guy. It had his password in there, and you could really it was 8-character logins, very short passwords back then. There were no rules, but it was his full name. It was like blank Mick, and the password. I remember to this day his password was Peaches5. And so,
oh my God,
I was in his class, and I walked up to him after class one day. I was like, "Hey man, hey, what's up? What are you doing?" "Oh, nothing." I'm like, "Hey, you should." You should be a little more careful on the internet. And he's like, "What do you mean?" Of course, that was a question you asked. What do you mean back then? And I was like, "Hey, I'm not going to say much, but you should pick a password more secure than Peaches5." And you should have seen his face. His mouth dropped to the ground. And I'm like, yeah, there's some people, there's some bad people out there that might do something with that. I'm like, create a harder password. And he's the only one I ever mentioned anything to. There were other people I knew that were on there, but I left it all alone. I never used, I think I logged into a couple the day I did it, just for, proof that it was real, and I got in, logged in, okay, and then disconnect. I'm out. go back to my own. Never did anything. I didn't want to mess with the admins. Like I did not want to do that. So back around, I said, this is the closest thing I got into getting into trouble. Well, years later, I crossed paths with the guy who was the main admin of that ISP. He's a little bit older than me. And I told him what I did. I told him I got this unshadowed, password file. I told him I cracked it and everything. And he thought it was hilarious. He said, and I don't know if I believe him, maybe, I don't know, but he said he knew someone was messing around with that file, but he didn't have the resources or the time to figure out who or what or how. But I don't know. But the silver lining is that guy was a bit of a genius. He went on to code the first AIM Linux client from scratch. He developed, I don't know if I want to name his name, but you could Google him if you want. I don't care. He went on to develop the Jabber protocol. Just this one guy, which I don't know if you guys know that.
Wow.
That was a very early chat protocol that became Google Talk. So like anything based on Google Talk, which I think is evolved into something else now, that was all this guy. But I did outsmart him one time. So I got that going for me.
That's so funny. How did you run into him?
He was a local guy. I kind of knew him through different circles. And I actually, I came back one year after college and I worked for a local guy making just very basic like banner ads and things like that for local companies. And the guy I was working for also had hired him to do some web coding and stuff. So we were in the same room a few times and I got up the, grew a pair and like brought it up to him and told him that story. And we kind of chatted about it a bit. And it was kind of like that was that. And he's like, good job. He understood that I didn't do anything bad with it. And I definitely could have. So I think he half appreciated it. And he might have been a little pissed off. But if he was, he didn't tell me.
That's really funny. That's also cool that you ended up meeting him later. It's so weird.
Yeah. I mean, the dude has his own wiki page. Obviously you do all those things that I mentioned. He's a guy that's out there and he's very well accomplished. So I guess that's a feather in my hat that I one time outsmarted that guy.
Nice. What other text files do you remember downloading?
Oh man, there was just big general ones. Like you always come across like the Anarchist Cookbook or something like that. I do remember one website that nobody else. I don't even know if there's any history on it out there, but it was one I went to. It was called schoolsucks.com. I don't know if you remember that or have heard of that, but it was the first place I ever discovered that had term papers you could just download in plain text. So I may or may not have used a couple of those in a pinch in high school.
That's hilarious.
These kids have it easy these days with their AI and Chat GPT. We had to go to schoolsucks.com back in the day.
That's hilarious. With phreaking and PBXing was the extent of, did you do any phreaking or?
Yeah, phones always interested me, and like I said, that what I just mentioned is literally all I've ever done, I guess, that you could consider real hacking, cracking passwords and stuff. If that's even considered that, I don't know. I've always been a person to be able to find tools and use those tools. If that makes someone a hacker, okay. But I've never really claimed to be one. Phreaking to me was fun. Messing with phone lines was fun. And I don't know if I mentioned, I was an only child. I had a lot of free time. Video games were my jam, but once I have on the computer and other things, if I could tinker with something, I did. And I would go to, back in the day, of course, I'll be saying that a lot here. There was stores that just had like magazines, like Hallmark stores. I think those were pretty much everywhere where you'd go in, it would be half greeting cards and just a giant wall of magazines. And I would always go to the video game magazines, get your Nintendo Powers and, EGM, things like that. But always next to those was the computer magazines. So I started getting like, the giant computer shopper or like PC magazine but then next to those I noticed, and it was literally at our local Hallmark store, nice, where grandma shops for greeting cards. They actually carried 2600. And I'm sure you know what that is. It's a bit infamous, but it was the kind of like a hacker quarterly, legitimately told you how to hack things and freak things and whatever. It was kind of the OG. I think it started in the 70s, didn't it? It's super old, but somehow they got distribution to these places that landed in, Midwest small town. And here I am. And I think it was like $10. And I was like, it was a little pamphlet. It looked like something, you got when you went to like a high school play. But I remember opening it up at the store and be like, oh, I need this. I definitely need this. So I got it. And the first one I got described how to make what was called a red box. And in the Phreaking world, there's all these nicknames for everything. A lot of them used colors back then. There was like blue box, red box, whatever. But the red box was my jam. With a red box, what you would do is get a portable like mini tape recorder that had a microphone on it, go to a payphone, drop in some coins, and record the tones it made through the speaker to a tape. Now, these old payphones back in the day, they knew you were entering money based on these tones. Your quarter would go in the slot. It would, trip the right lever, and that lever would make a beep in the phone, and that told the system, give him 25 cents credit. Well, the mics on those things were hot and integrated into the system. So if you had a recording of that exact beep, it didn't know a difference between a quarter being put in or you playing a tape of a quarter being put in. So we had a little like 7-Eleven type store in our neighborhood, quiet area, not a ton of traffic, with a payphone sitting out front about 20 feet away, like they usually did, on a payphone on a corner. We wore out that red box I made. We called 900 numbers. We would call overseas if we could find phone numbers to call. We would call anybody we knew in the country long distance for free. And that got me interested in more, and I got that directly from that 2600 magazine, how to do that. It spelled it out for you. We would call like Nintendo 900 numbers, and we called that Miss Cleo, psychic lady, sometimes.
Oh my God. She was everywhere.
Yeah.
How'd that, was it really Miss Cleo? How'd that go?
I have a feeling, it's racist, but it could possibly be a racist statement, but I feel like they just got 100 people that sounded like her to answer the phone, which I'm sure they did. It obviously couldn't have been. Like you said, she was on cable every 20 minutes. There's no way one person could handle a business like that. The person we would always talk to always sounded the same and always said that they were Miss Cleo. But I did talk to quote unquote her. That was I do remember that.
What did you ask her?
We would just come up with stupid things, and we would make up stuff about ourselves that wasn't true to see if we could catch them. I don't know. We were just kids being kids. But I do remember doing that from the gas station.
That's hilarious.
We would also, what else would we do? So I got that teen line, and we had teen lines right before caller ID really became a thing. I don't want to latch onto phones too much. I know this is an AOL podcast, but this is fun stuff to me, at least. I'm sure some people might be able to relate. But so on these teen lines, they had 3-way calling, which was you could call one friend. As soon as they picked up and you were connected, you could then call a third friend and have a 3-way conversation. You could daisy chain this as well. So if one of the people you call that is on your 3-way call could add another person, if they had 3-way calling, they could add another person. Eventually, you could have 3, 4, 5, 6 friends on the same call. It was pretty cool back then. Well, we would connect 3 or 4 or 5 of us together, and then we would start prank calling. And what we would do is one of us would call. And so you could add somebody as long as someone was already connected. You couldn't actually go out and grab 2 people at the same time. It kind of had to be one at a time. So what we would do is I would call a buddy, and then he would call a buddy. We'd get at least 3 of us. And then one of them would call like Pizza Hut during a busy time. And they'd be like, okay, please hold. Pizza Hut, please hold. So we're connected to them. So one of us would scramble and one of us would call Domino's. Hey, this is Domino's. How can I help you? And then all of us would mute, and we would let Domino's and Pizza Hut yell at each other. You called me. No, you called me. What the hell? You're wasting my time. Who is this? This is Pizza Hut. Shut up. This is Domino's. Stop prank calling me. And they both thought the other party was guilty. Oh my God. That was our entertainment for a very long time. And that's when we discovered things like star codes. Everybody knows star 70, that turned off call waiting. Star 69 is the most infamous one, either because of the number or because that's how you could call back the last person that called you. Star 67, which was awesome, blocked caller ID. So if you called somebody and you hit star 67 first, they didn't know it was you calling them. And star 66 would be it would call back the last number that phone had called. Most people don't know that one, because why would you want to do that? Why wouldn't you just hit the redial button that every phone had? Well, we would go up to the payphones, put in some fake money with the red box, and hit star 66 and see who the last person called. People call interesting people from payphones even back then.
Like who?
I don't know. It'd be like half the time they were screaming, or we would be like, "Hey, how you doing? Sorry, I got cut off." Or sometimes we would be outside, we'd see a guy hang up, and we'd walk right up to the phone, put in some, fake quarters and call star 66, be like, hey, never mind, I'll see you tomorrow. Or we would just make up stuff. I don't know. We would just mess with people because we were calling who they just called. But yeah, that's pretty much it with the phone stuff. I mean, sometimes we figured out a way to like attach to our neighbors' analog wireless phones. Sometimes you could listen to people's conversations and stuff. But yeah, the phone stuff always interested me, but it that tech evolved pretty quickly. Pretty much soon everyone had caller ID. You couldn't really do those prank calls anymore. They in analog phones went out the window. They started doing digital phones that had what's called DSS, which would change the frequency on the fly. So even if you hacked their frequency, it would switch every so often, and you'd get kicked out. So that kind of ended that whole game. But
That's interesting. Yeah, those are good times back then, pranking people. I do recall.
yeah, it was a very short. I mean, the world that existed where you could do what I just talked about with like teen lines, three-way calling, and all that. It was really only like a year-long window in this world where that was even possible. Because before that, the tech didn't exist to at least cheaply to do that. And then after that, it just wasn't possible. The people knew who was calling. You couldn't really, well, they figured it out pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, you could start 6-7 and people got wise to that pretty quick.
Yep. But okay, I guess that moves us to, you had asked about MP3s. So when I was in ShiZZa on AOL, I had these FTP access, all this stuff. I noticed more and more, I guess you could call them the higher ups. I don't know. I never knew the hierarchy of these groups or ShiZZa or anything, but you knew there was people that were already always around, and you knew there were people that had a lot of information. So I kind of gravitated towards those people. I could learn more from them. I could maybe get more from them, sites, whatever. And I noticed a lot of them talking about IRC. And I think a lot of them had kind of gravitated that way. AOL is on TCP/IP now. A lot of people were discovering IRC and FNet specifically, I guess. Most things I heard about were always FNet. But like you said, I found that MP3, that Metallica one. And in that info file, it mentioned that guy Netfrack and a few other people. And he actually had a group name, CDA. And I was like, what is this stuff? And at the very bottom, it mentioned, find us and, hashtag CDA on FNet on IRC. I was like, okay, I'm going to crack my knuckles, install MIRC, figure out how the hell to get on this IRC thing. So I got on, and to my surprise, it was simple. As soon as you could connect, the world's your oyster. Nobody really hid channels or had secret channels or keys back then. So if there was a channel, or you could just do a /list and see what was on the server and find all new stuff. I mean, man, I wish AOL had that feature where you could list every channel. They kind of had those guides, but the IRC made it a lot easier. So I found CDA. I went and started talking to these guys. They had like XDCC bots where you could directly download stuff. And I grabbed a couple. I remember when I entered that room, they had one bot and it had 5 MP3s on it. And if you go back historically and look at info files and stuff, those 5 are the first ever pirated MP3s. That was the first group of any sort. Which, God, I wish I still had those. I talked to Netfrack recently, and he doesn't even have his first one, which made me sad. But anybody out there has Metallica Until It Sleeps, dated August 1996, contact one of us, because I want it so bad, because it is the first one. Somebody out there has to have it, even though the guy that ripped it doesn't. But anyways, soon after that, I met more people in that chat room. I hung out there. I was a teenager. Music was my thing. Music was expensive. It was the days of $20 CDs, and you'd only get one good song, and you lived with it. Well, now you didn't have to live with it. You had 2 meg files that sounded great. Yeah, you could only play them on your computer, but that was enough when you're a teenager hanging out. So I joined another channel soon after called RNS, otherwise known as Rabid Neurosis. This was a bigger kind of, I want to say more organized, but they were definitely eventually more organized MP3 group. It was a very small community when I joined it. I remember there was maybe 10 people in the RNS channel, including the founders. Shout out to Bone Thug and NoFX, wherever you are. I haven't crossed paths with you again, but I hope to someday. And the original developers of Winamp were in there too. Like some of these guys that invented or developed the early builds of Winamp. I know for sure I indirectly helped on some early Winamp design ideas just by chatting with these guys. I had beta builds and source code and all that. It was wild. But yeah, we were still using that MP3 play, the Fraunhofer one. The kind of guy that took the reins and was the first leader of RNS was this guy named Al Capone. I was buds with him. I think he just liked me because we had similar taste in music. And honestly, that's all it took back then. We were a very small community. We were in a budding community. It was brand new. And if you had a buddy on there that you trusted and you knew and it was in your group and had the CD you wanted, but didn't want to dish out $20 for, he'll hook you up and then you hook him up. That's just how it worked. We had each other's backs, and we really just started off in RNS ripping our own personal CDs and honestly ripping singles. We didn't even do full CDs right away. It was like, here's the new, I don't know, Silverchair song. Go nuts. And that was it. And it got to these top sites. It filtered up to these FTP sites. It eventually got, I'm sure it got to AOL. At that time, I'd kind of cut it with a knife between AOL and IRC and RNS. I was in the music scene, and that was all I needed. And I already still had FTP access and stuff. So really, ShiZZa and AOL really had nothing else to offer me that I was into at the time. So I ripped some of my personal CDs. I eventually became what they call a courier. I feel like it's hard on this podcast because you have everybody. I know there's just general listeners, but you also have guys that know everything about everything I'm talking about. There's people that, I feel like I kind of want to dumb it down as if I'm talking to a buddy, at work. But
you should
I also want to be technical because that's the stuff people might pick out of the air and be like, oh yeah. So I'll try to keep a balance, I guess, but some for the lay person. And again, it's my story. And I guess I have to assume nobody out there knows this stuff, unless they happen to be part of this, tight community. But eventually I became a courier, which is a person that moves things between sites, helps spread the uploads. There's a great program called FXP, or a protocol called FXP. It was a godsend for any of us that were still on dial-up at the time. FlashX FXP was the app that kind of boiled to the top. But that would let you essentially, again, I dumb it down a bit, but it would let you log into two separate FTP sites and basically copy files from one to the other directly without going through your connection. So yeah, I was on a 28A dial-up modem, but I could move my uploaded CD or someone else's uploaded CD to another RNS site in seconds because it was a T1 to a T1 connection. And I just kind of controlled it and told it what to do. So that was awesome. And honestly, it was really the only thing I could really contribute being on a dial-up connection. It took a full overnight upload to just upload one CD back then. And that's if it didn't break down or something goes wrong or, whatever. Plenty of broken downloads and uploads back then. For some reason, uploads were always harder than downloads. I don't know why. So it was less work for me to just use FXP. And I would just kind of blend in. I like to chat. It was my hangout time. I would chat with people in RNS and I would download like crazy. And I kind of just had already established myself because I was in early, just kind of like I did in ShiZZa towards the end. I blended in, I got the access I wanted, and then I could just hang out with my friends and we'd help each other out if they needed it. I actually joined a second group during this time called UMA. Sorry, they get forgotten about. It was Underground Music Alliance. It was the first ever MP3 group to focus on like live bootlegs and concerts. I would actually drive up to Madison, Wisconsin in high school because it was a big college town. They had a college scene and they had a really cool area that had some literally underground CD shops. It'd be like in the basement under a bank and you'd go in and there'd be half legit CDs and then half like pressed silvers from who knows where, because there were no burners yet. But, I picked up a lot of like Rage Against the Machine and Pearl Jam bootlegs back then and then put those onto the internet. So there's still a lot of that stuff out there, I think, that originated from me in all its 128-bit, KB glory in the early days of MP3s. Before there were like CD burners that you could just, everybody knows what a burner is, I guess. I don't know if people have forgotten about that yet by an hour now, but people our age definitely know burning things. You'd get a blank disc, you could put the files, music, data, whatever on it, and then you had a copy. Before that was a thing, there were legitimate bootleg operations throughout the world that had access to the equipment to make the equivalent of a copyrighted CD. They call them pressing machines. There were, I think a lot of them originated out of Russia back then because they didn't really have copyright law, or especially international copyright law. So they would get a hold of really good quality, like soundboard recordings of concerts and clean it all up, split it all up into tracks, press it onto CDs en masse, and then spread them throughout the world. I do remember some sites that you could actually order from. They always seemed a little too shady and too expensive for me to dabble. And I didn't even have a credit card back then. I couldn't really do it. And I sure wasn't going to ask my parents to, hey, can I order this CD off this Russian website? I would get a hold of these in Madison when we went up there, and then rip them and then upload them for this group UMA. And we got some traction. You can find them. There's remnants of UMA out there on the internet and info files and stuff. But it's really just so we could trade live music, because there was all those, crazy like Grateful Dead tape traders back in the day. I didn't want to do that. But if we could trade live music through the internet, heck yeah, let's do it. I still have some MP3s from back then of live concerts that have never surfaced anywhere else. So it was all worth it in the end. But I kind of just coasted. I was in RNS for a while. I spent all my high school graduation money on a Pentium 2 with as much hard drive space as I could afford, which I think was only a few gigs at the time, but loaded up. And then I kind of just coasted my first year of college. My second year of college, I went to a different school. And this was this is when I actually know the dates. This was fall of 1999. So I was in some dorms at a state college, a very wired college. In my dorm room, I had a connection that was unrestricted, unmonitored, unfiltered. I'll let you guess. Guess what my speeds were in 1999 in my room.
Could you do somewhere between 500 to, sorry, I think I used to be able to do like 100K a second upload for my college. So you were something like maybe a 500K. I don't know. So I'm trying to think of like age difference.
They had no restrictions on our connections. So my connection from my dorm room was full up and down 100 megabit.
Oh, wow.
So basically fast internet today, 25 years later. Man, we're old. But yeah, so okay, you don't give a guy like me in a group like that kind of access and not pay for it. So I immediately started up second day of class, or second day I was there in the dorms, unboxed the computer, got connected. Holy crap. I started an internal RNS top site, FTP site on my new computer. Now I would go to class and come back and I would see dozens of new albums on my drive, because I became one of RNS's like go-to spots. If you're a ripper, you uploaded it to me first, because like we mentioned FXP, they knew if they put it on me first, they could upload it to me as fast as humanly possible at the time. And they knew they could get it off of mine and FXP it somewhere else at 100 megabit. So I was ground zero for a lot of that stuff, which now makes me more nervous than ever. But I mean, again, 25 years have passed. It was, looking back at it, I was flipping nuts, and I was extremely lucky that they weren't like monitoring anything back then.
Yeah, I hear you. As soon as I got to college, I started, I think it was, what was your FTP server? I used ServU FTP. That was my big one.
There was ServU and, what was the other one? Put me on the spot. I did use ServU for a while, and I really, like I said, it was an RNS internal top site. So I didn't even have my friends, people I knew in person. I didn't have any of them on there. I had like the top upper echelon of rippers, and I gave them access to this, and that was kind of it. So I was only made like 20 accounts on it, and it was just bonkers how many CDs would. I mean, I'm not joking when I said I went to class, came back 2 hours later, and there were 50 new albums on my drive, and a lot of them pre-releases.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So that was, and I did that for a while, and then that was exactly this. This is 99. So I think were you in college at this same time? Are we about the same age?
No, well, I get to college about 2000. So.
Okay. So this is 99, but you were 2000. Okay. That's perfect though. Cause that was the heart of like Napster. Napster was active then.
Yeah. I met a lot of my friends throughout college through Napster. Like I was on Napster in freshman year, and I was downloading Fish songs, and they were just insane speeds. And so I messaged the guy, and I'm like, "Are you like at my school?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm on the third floor of this building." I'm like, "I'm on the first floor." So I immediately went up to his room, and we became buddies.
That's funny. That actually tripped a memory for me. one of my favorite TV shows of all time is that old show, Mystery Science Theater 3000. We used to trade episodes of that were ripped off TV too. And I found a guy at my college who had a 200 CD giant booklet of every episode on like DivX discs ripped on there. And he trusted me enough. He let me borrow it for like a month. And all I did was copy that whole damn thing. And I had spindles, like stacks of spindles, but I had every Mystery Science Theater on there. But yeah, I just met him through it was like through like DC++ or Napster or something like that at the time. But, so at that time, like I said, Napster, and it was just Napster, and then Kazaa and stuff like that came later when Napster went down. But in 99, Napster blew up. I was in the dorms. Very quickly, everyone knew about Napster. The girl down the hall suddenly was online grabbing songs. I didn't need to be running this probably risky top site for this crazy group, giving me pre-release CDs that don't come out for a month. Like, that's a little bit of heat, whether it is real or not. It makes you a little nervous. So I kind of bailed on the scene. I had classes to go to. I had a social life. Napster was popular enough for me to grab songs I wanted. So I used that as a way to just kind of, the Homer Simpson, fade into the bushes. I kind of did that from the scene. I chatted for a little bit, but I don't know how much you know about the lore of RNS. I don't really need to get into that, but the leadership changed, and the whole group kind of changed. There wasn't really infighting. It was just more of a shift to things that seemed more risky. So actually, Al Capone and I got out at like the same time. He was like the guy that led the thing. We were there from the start. We were in this group for, 3-4 years, give or take. And we both were just like, F this, we're out of here. So then we just, we were buds for a bit. We obviously were still on FNet in other senses. I kind of just was really done with the scene at that point. And it was also like the beginning of the whole .com boom era, which I quickly shifted to making money online instead.
So do you remember when like Napster went down and stuff? Did you go, because like, I feel like there's a cycle like with this stuff where MP3s did make it to AOL. I got some of the best techno like I've ever heard on AOL. Someone did a really great job with that. I remember there's Napster. It went down. I go back to IRC. Like, okay, I'm gonna go back to IRC to get stuff. And then like BitTorrent comes out, and that was crazy when BitTorrent came out. Mm-hmm. And then everyone cracked down on it. And like, most like, when I say normal people, most non-tech people, stopping people from using BitTorrent if you weren't using VPN or whatever. Mm-hmm. People started buying regular media again, but the real nerds just went back to IRC. It's like a cycle. Like okay, like something crazy happened, like Napster, and then you just go like, oh, now I'm back to IRC. Yep. And then it just keep happening over and over again. Did you notice that too?
Piracy has always been and always will be a game of whack-a-mole. They're gonna try to, if something gets too big, they're gonna stomp it down, but someone else is gonna pop up somewhere else. You're never gonna fully stop it. They'll always try to make examples of people. They'll try to scare people off, and sometimes it works. And especially if it's a big case or gets a lot of media attention, like something like a Napster going to court, or you see piracy people in Congress. Like that draws attention from more than, especially for the lay people, the normies, the non-geeks. Like if you can make something affordable for them, they're not going to go out of their way to pirate it. But that's the thin line, is the very few occasions where it's affordable to get everything you want for most people.
Hack the planet! Hack the planet!
Check your feeds for the next part of this 3-part series.
Welcome to cyberspace.